Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the feeding behaviors of the desert cottontail, also known as Audubon's rabbit. Specifically, I am going to be looking at the preference of this type of rabbit in Brushy Peak Regional Preserve, which is a local hiking spot near my house that has open grasslands, shrublands, woodlands, and has a high population of desert cottontails. Starting with what we know from class, we see the mammalian class obviously includes rabbits, and this is the species that we're working with today and that I worked with for my project. Specifically from the order Lagomorpha, which includes hares, pikas, and rabbits, we're looking at the species Sylvilagus auduboni, which is the desert cottontail, and it prefers dry, arid climates that have open grasslands. And a few characteristic traits which we're about to look at are their incisors, large ears, and their trademark white tail, which give them their name, Cottontail. So looking first, they have continuously growing incisors that grow their whole life. They have a mouth flap that actually allows them to keep their mouth closed while they're chewing. So it looks like their cheeks they have a pouch in their cheeks. They have highly vascularized, very large ears that help them keep cool during the dry and hot months during summer. They also have this cottontail, their trademark cottontail, which allows them to warn and signal others during for predators during fleeing, where they have a characteristic zigzag fleeing through the underbrush. But yeah, so here we can see their large incisors or specialized teeth that will continue to grow if they do not gnaw and grind down food constantly. So this defines a very uniquely herbaceous diet, high in vegetation, where they spend hours and hours and hours chewing their food in order to get the water out and in order to get in order to grind their teeth down. The coloration, going back really quick, we see the coloration is absolutely premium in order to help them hide in the shadows and depressions in between the grass, which allows them to get away from predators and feed without worrying about predators eating them. Some food choices are grasses and shrubs. The niche that cottontails fulfill is they actually are able to create habitats because their importance is the diet of huge amounts of predators, birds of prey, native coyotes, foxes, mountain lions, even humans depended on rabbits for protein for a really long time. There are many available options of plants at Brushy Peak, which is why I chose it, and the dry season is pretty specific when comparing rabbits with other studies about what they eat. The main question I set out to answer was, what is the main component or the majority food choice of the desert cottontail at Brushy Peak? And my hypothesis was that they would prefer to eat grasses over leaves and twigs. And in order to assess this hypothesis, I had to collect data that supported and evaluated what type of food they were eating, how often. And I'll tell you how I did that right now. So first, what I did was I set up this table that I would fill out every time I observed an individual, where I was, what they were eating, and if they were eating every single minute on the minute. I would look up and see if that individual was chewing, which I'll explain in a second is a very specific behavior. It's characteristic. You have to see their bottom jaw rotating and not just their upper nose twitching. But what I found out was early morning observation was necessary to actually be able to see the feeding behaviors, even though they eat in the early morning and early evening. It's much easier to see feeding behaviors in the morning before other hikers are there to disturb them, when it's easier to observe. I used 6 minutes per individual for the marker, and it was all localized on this side of the trail. At first, I went through the entire trail, but that was just a waste of time because the rabbits weren't found everywhere. They were mostly found on this side, like going on this hill as I followed it up. And up here, you can see as well, they were found at the very peak. I saw them observing this way. But yeah, I would follow the trail up to the left side on the west loop, and I would observe the rabbits, the desert cottontails, with my binoculars, because I could see the individual with the naked eye, but it was very, very hard to see the actual jaw movements of the rabbits to see if they were actually eating or not. We'll look right now at what that looks like. Right now, we'll look at a video first of regular behavior that is not feeding, and then at feeding behavior. You can see here that even though the nose is twitching and the body is relaxed, there's this grooming behavior and not feeding behavior. As we zoom in, we can see these two individuals are simply alert and are resting, and they are not actually eating. This video shows a cottontail that is eating. We can see the bottom mandible rotates in a gnawing, chewing fashion that is not seen in a regular alert activity. As you can see right here, the bottom jaw, the mandible, is chewing behavior. See, that's what I was looking for on the trail, is looking for that characteristic mandible rotation. All right, and looking at the results for my project, I found that for 108 minutes out of the 200 minutes I successfully saw feeding behaviors or successfully observed feeding, 106 of them, 106 out of 108 were spent on feeding on grass. This was it was exactly what I was expected, but it was hard because I wish that I was able to see the rabbits eating in other locations, such as like rocky outcroppings where there was only shrubs and no grass, or in the woodlands where there was, fallen trees and debris and rock and less open grass. But yeah, so 98% of the observed time that was successfully seen feeding was spent on grass. There was a total of 204 minutes spent observing over the 4 days, but not all of those minutes were successful feeding behaviors. The majority of the feeding behavior was seen where the rabbits were eating blades of grass over twigs and leaves. There was one instance where I saw rabbits eating twigs, and it was when a rabbit tore off a twig with its teeth and then held it between its paws to gnaw on. But it was only one time, and it was in a group of others that were eating grass, and I watched to see if they would eat twigs more, and they did not. Another study I found on the volcano rat saw that the majority of the volcano rat's diet was comprised of grasses as well, even in the wet season. But this is important because it implies that I was only able to observe during the dry season, and maybe if I observe now while there's precipitation, or in a month from now when there is high levels of precipitation, the data may change. Conclusion: 98% of the observed feeding time was spent eating grass. So, the desert cottontail prefers to eat grass over twigs and leaves. The whole reason I asked this question in the first place was because I wanted to understand how they survived and what depended on their survival. There are many species such as hawks, eagles, coyotes, foxes that depend on these desert cottontails as their main food source, and without cottontails they would not be able to survive. In fact, the whole ecosystem wouldn't survive because invasive grasses, if are held back and eaten, consumed by cottontails. So these grasses would be cutting off other native species if otherwise.